The markets closing after a day rocked by shaky economic news. But take a look at this. The Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ all closing in the green. That comes after news that job growth over the year ending in March has been much weaker than we thought. This really looks like the market's apparently betting that an interest rate cut is even more likely after those revised numbers provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed the economy added almost 1 million fewer jobs than were initially estimated for the year ending in March.
This revision proves two things. Number one, the president was right, and this is why we need new leadership at the Fed. And this makes it very clear that President Trump inherited a much worse economy by the Biden administration than ever reported. And it also proves that the Federal Reserve is holding our monetary policy far too restrictive. Interest rates are too high. The Fed needs to cut the rates because of the mess that we inherited from the Biden administration.
So she says that. Now, we are living in Trump's economy. We're living under Trump's tariff regime. As you saw, the Trump administration yet again blaming Joe Biden and Jerome Powell. Trump has, of course, threatened to fire Powell because the Fed has yet to cut interest rates. He hasn't followed through on that threat, though, but he did fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics last month after a disappointing July jobs report. Economists looking at those numbers don't see a conspiracy, though. They see a warning. Today, the J.P. Morgan CEO, Jamie Dimon, looked at those same numbers that the White House gets, and he saw it this way.
The economy's weakening. Whether that is on the way to recession or just weakening, I don't know, and that just confirms what we already thought, kind of.
And I know
that's a big revision. They're still spending money. It's a little bit different depending what income set they're coming from. They still have jobs. Now, you just gave a big number, so consumers tend to react to that. So the consumers weaken, confidence weaken, corporate profit is still up. And there's a lot of different factors in the economy right now. It's hard to figure out what it all means.
In the early decades of the 21st century, the world assumed the centers of economic gravity were fixed, that global power revolved around the same familiar capitals, and that emerging markets would rise slowly, quietly, and predictably. But that assumption has just been shattered. A new global shift is underway, subtle at first, but now unmistakable. And at the center of this shift stands a continent long underestimated, long overlooked, and now essential to the future of global growth: Africa, the world's youngest population, the world's largest untapped mineral reserves, the fastest growing cities, and the next frontier of global resource power. As traditional economies face strain, Africa is stepping into a new role, not as a passive supplier of raw materials, but as a strategic force capable of reshaping global economic relationships. This is the story of how Africa's resource boom is quietly redrawing the global economic map, and how the United States, Europe, China, and emerging powers are recalibrating in response. In recent years, global markets have entered a period of unprecedented uncertainty. The World Bank reports slowing growth across advanced economies. The IMF highlights rising debt, inflation, and supply chain disruptions. And the International Energy Agency warns that the transition to clean energy will require the largest mineral investment surge in human history. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, manganese, rare earths, the building blocks of the modern world, are no longer just commodities. They are the foundation of 21st century power. But there is one problem. Most of these minerals are overwhelmingly located in one place: Africa. According to the African Development Bank, Africa holds 30% of the world's mineral reserves, over 40% of global gold, 90% of platinum group metals, 70% of global cobalt, the world's largest untapped hydropower potential, and enormous solar, wind, and green hydrogen capacity. This is not just abundance. It is leverage, and leverage is the currency of geopolitics. For decades, African economies were described as emerging, developing, or future potential. Today, that future has arrived. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, the largest free trade zone on Earth, has created a marketplace of 1.3 billion people, with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. The African Union has joined the G20 as a permanent member, and by 2050, Africa will host a quarter of the world's population. This demographic advantage is not just statistics, it is workforce, it is innovation, it is demand, it is power. But what truly propelled Africa onto the global stage was something else: the world's race toward the energy transition. Solar panels, electric cars, wind turbines, battery storage, microchips, all of them depend on minerals that Africa holds in extraordinary quantities, as the International Energy Agency notes. Without Africa, the global energy transition cannot happen. This single sentence changed everything. Today, global powers are adjusting to a new reality. Control over future industries depends on access to African resources. And the competition is intensifying. The United States-Washington strategy is centered on securing battery minerals, building new supply chains, reducing dependence on single-source suppliers, and strengthening partnerships through the Mineral Security Partnership. Recent U.S. investments include a $300 million deal for Zambia DRC battery supply chains, support for EV minerals under the Inflation Reduction Act, multiple agreements in Angola for critical minerals. For the U.S., Africa represents stability, diversification, and strategic resilience. The European Union Europe faces its own pressure. The EU's Green Deal requires massive quantities of minerals it does not possess. So, Europe is accelerating deals with Namibia for green hydrogen, Morocco for battery components, South Africa for green energy technologies, and West Africa for strategic minerals. Europe calls it de-risking, but in Africa, it has become a competition. China, already deeply established, continues to expand. It currently controls more than 70% of cobalt processing, 60% of lithium processing, 80% of rare earths refinement. China's Belt and Road Initiative has been a key driver of infrastructure, mining partnerships, and industrial zones across Africa. As markets shift, China is determined not to lose ground. Africa is no longer the periphery of global strategy, it is the center. For the first time in modern history, African nations are taking coordinated steps to control not just their resources, but their value chains. Countries across the continent are demanding local refining, local processing, local manufacturing, and greater revenue retention. The DRC Zambia battery belt, to nations, once competitors in cobalt and copper, are now launching a regional EV battery initiative with support from AFDB, the US, and the EU. Namibia and green hydrogen. Namibia is emerging as a global leader in green hydrogen, securing multi-billion-dollar commitments from Europe, the US, and Asian investors. Guinea's bauxite policy. Guinea now requires that raw bauxite, the core mineral for aluminum, must be refined locally before export. Tanzania, Rwanda, and Mozambique. These nations are developing local processing hubs for graphite, nickel, and rare earths. A new Africa, a self-determined Africa, an Africa negotiating from a position of strength. As Africa gains leverage, global powers are responding with urgency. New embassies are opening across the continent. Diplomatic visits have tripled in the last decade. Infrastructure proposals are increasing. Investment pledges are at record highs. But Africa is no longer choosing based on history or politics. It is choosing based on benefit. In this new era, partnerships must deliver technology transfer, local jobs, industrial value, long-term development. The continent is done with extractive relationships. The world has no choice but to adapt. With opportunity comes challenge. Africa must address infrastructure gaps, governance issues, energy shortages, regional trade barriers, and global market volatility, but the momentum is undeniable. The African Development Bank projects the continent will be the second fastest growing region in the world over the next 5 years. The IMF estimates Africa will drive a significant share of global workforce growth by 2040. Tech ecosystems in Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, and Rwanda are attracting billions. Cities like Lagos, Nairobi, Accra, Johannesburg, and Kigali are emerging as global innovation hubs. Africa is changing, not slowly, but rapidly. In boardrooms, parliaments, military councils, and diplomatic summits, Africa is no longer an afterthought. It is the variable that decides the outcome. Can the world build enough batteries? Can renewable energy meet demand? Can supply chains remain stable? Can global industry continue to grow? The answer to all of these questions now intersects with Africa. The world is not witnessing Africa's rise, it is witnessing Africa's return. A continent not emerging, but re-emerging, not waiting, but leading, not following, but defining the next chapter of global economics. And as nations recalibrate, one truth becomes clear: the 21st century will be shaped not by those who dominate oil, but by those who steward the minerals, energy, and human capital of the future. Africa stands at the center of that future, and the world is adjusting, investing, negotiating, and competing because Africa's strategic importance can no longer be ignored. This is not just an economic transition, it is a geopolitical realignment, a redrawing of influence and opportunity. Africa's resource power has created a new global landscape, a landscape where cooperation replaces exploitation, where value replaces extraction, and where partnership replaces dependency. The world is waking up to Africa's importance, and Africa is waking up to its own power.